The moment Sarah Grace's laughter rang out across the dusty main street of Salt Lake City, Utah, she knew she had made a terrible mistake. But the sight of her husband Cornelius stumbling backward off the wooden boardwalk and landing seat first in a water trough had been so absurd that the sound escaped her lips before she could stop it. It was September of 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the growing settlement that had become a way station for travelers heading west and those seeking new lives in the Utah Territory. Sarah stood frozen on the boardwalk outside the general store, her hand flying to cover her mouth as the laughter died in her throat, replaced by cold dread that spread through her chest like ice water. Cornelius Whitmore emerged from the trough sputtering and soaked, his expensive Eastern suit clinging to his portly frame, his carefully pomaded hair plastered to his skull. Water streamed from his clothing as he hauled himself up, and Sarah could see the rage building in his face like a thunderstorm gathering on the horizon. She had been married to this man for 3 years, long enough to recognize every subtle shift in his expression, every warning sign that preceded his violence. His pale blue eyes fixed on her with a hatred so pure it made her legs weak, and she took an involuntary step backward even though there was nowhere to run. Several townspeople had witnessed the fall, and a few poorly concealed chuckles reached Sarah's ears from across the street where a group of cowboys had paused in their work. Cornelius's humiliation was complete, and she knew from bitter experience that he would take every ounce of his wounded pride out on her flesh. He advanced on her with water squelching in his boots, his jowls quivering with fury, and grabbed her arm with fingers that dug into her skin like iron spikes. "You think that was funny?" he hissed through clenched teeth, his face so close to hers that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, even through the scent of trough water. "You dare laugh at me in front of these people?" "I am sorry," Sarah whispered, trying to pull away from his grip. "It was an accident. I did not mean to laugh." "An accident," he repeated, his voice dripping with venom. "You have had too many accidents lately, wife. I think it is time you remembered your place." He dragged her along the boardwalk toward the small house they rented on the edge of town, and Sarah stumbled after him, her heart hammering in her chest. She was 22 years old, still young despite the hardness that 3 years of marriage had carved into her features. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her simple calico dress was faded from too many washings. She had been pretty once, or so her mother had told her before she died, but Cornelius had a way of making her feel ugly and worthless, as though she were nothing more than property he had purchased with his marriage vows. The walk back to their house felt like a death march. Sarah's mind raced, searching for ways to placate him, words that might diffuse his anger, but she knew from experience that nothing she said would matter now. Cornelius had been drinking, which made him meaner than usual, and the public humiliation would demand a price in bruises and pain. She thought about running, but where would she go? She had no family, no money of her own, and in 1878, a woman without a husband was barely better than a vagrant. Lucas Thatcher watched the entire scene unfold from his position outside the livery stable where he had been checking on his horse. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent under the open sky. At 28, he had been working cattle drives and ranch work since he was 15, and he had developed the kind of quiet competence that came from relying on himself in harsh conditions. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck beneath his worn hat, and his gray eyes missed very little of what happened around him. He had arrived in Salt Lake City 2 weeks earlier, hired on temporarily at the Brenton Ranch just outside town to help with their fall roundup, and he had noticed Sarah Grace the first time he saw her in town. She had a sadness about her that touched something in his chest, a defeated quality in the set of her shoulders that reminded him of a beaten horse. He had seen her husband too, a pompous Easterner who strutted around town like he owned it, despite being relatively new to the territory himself. Lucas had taken an instant dislike to Cornelius Whitmore, the kind of instinctive aversion he felt toward rattlesnakes and men who cheated at cards. Watching the man drag his wife down the street now, seeing the fear in her face, made Lucas's jaw tighten with anger. "That ain't right," muttered Pete Sorensen, another ranch hand who stood beside Lucas. Pete was an older cowboy with a grizzled beard and the kind of weather-beaten face that came from 40 years of outdoor living. That woman laughed at him falling in the water trough, but hell, it was funny. Man walks backward without looking and falls butt first into a horse trough. What does he expect? He expects his wife to act like she is scared of him all the time, Lucas said quietly, watching until the couple disappeared around a corner. And I would bet my saddle that he beats her when nobody's watching. Probably, Pete agreed with a sigh. But what can you do? She is his wife. Law does not much care what a man does to his own wife, long as he does not kill her. Lucas said nothing, but something hard and cold settled in his gut. He had been raised by a mother who worked herself to death, trying to keep her children fed after his father died in a mining accident. He had seen her struggle and sacrifice, and he had developed a deep respect for women who endured hardship with dignity. The idea of a man using his physical strength to terrorize someone weaker made him sick. Sarah knew what was coming the moment Cornelius slammed the door of their small house behind them. He released her arm, and she stumbled into the center of the main room, which served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, all in one. The house was sparsely furnished with items they had brought from the east, and it always felt cold to Sarah, no matter how much she tried to make it a home. Cornelius poured himself a large glass of whiskey from the bottle he kept on the sideboard and drank it down in 2 gulps, his wet clothes dripping onto the floor. "You embarrassed me," he said, his voice dangerously quiet now. "In front of the entire town, you laughed at me like I was some kind of fool." "Cornelius, please, I truly did not mean to laugh," Sarah said, backing toward the wall. "It was just surprise. It was not meant as disrespect." "Liar," he snarled, and then his hand shot out and caught her across the face with enough force to send her reeling into the wall. Stars exploded across her vision, and she tasted blood in her mouth. "You think you are better than me, don't you? You think you can humiliate me and there will be no consequences?" "No," Sarah gasped, trying to shield her face with her arms as he advanced on her. "I do not think I am better than you. I have never thought that." But Cornelius was beyond reason now. His fist crashed into her ribs, driving the air from her lungs, and she crumpled to the floor, gasping. He kicked her once, twice, and she curled into a ball, trying to protect her vital organs the way she had learned to do during previous beatings. The pain was white-hot and all-consuming, and she bit down on her lip to keep from crying out because making noise always made him angrier. She retreated into a dark place in her mind, a survival mechanism she had developed over 3 years of marriage, and waited for it to be over. When Cornelius finally stopped, breathing hard from exertion, Sarah lay motionless on the floor. Her ribs ached with every breath, and her face throbbed where he had struck her. She heard him pour another glass of whiskey and gulp it down. Then he kicked her leg almost casually. "Get up and make me dinner," he commanded, "and clean up this water I tracked in. This floor is a mess." Sarah forced herself to move, each motion sending fresh waves of pain through her battered body. She pulled herself to her feet using the wall for support, keeping her eyes downcast. Cornelius had already turned away from her, dismissing her now that his anger was spent, and he walked into the bedroom to change out of his wet clothes. Sarah stood trembling in the kitchen area, tasting blood, and wondered how much more of this life she could endure before something inside her simply broke beyond repair. She spent the next hour moving mechanically through the tasks of preparing dinner, her body screaming in protest with every movement. She made beef stew from the tough meat she had bought at the market that morning, cutting vegetables with shaking hands, stirring the pot over the wood stove, even though the heat made her dizzy. Cornelius emerged dressed in dry clothes and sat at the table reading a newspaper he had brought from back east, ignoring her completely now, as though nothing had happened. When she served him his meal, he ate without comment, not even looking at her face, which she knew must be swelling and bruising. Sarah did not eat herself, because her jaw hurt too much, and because the thought of food made her stomach turn. She cleaned the kitchen in silence, washed the dishes, swept the floor, and when Cornelius finally went to bed, she sat alone in the darkened main room and stared at nothing. The next morning, Sarah rose before dawn, as she always did, and began her daily chores, despite the pain that lanced through her ribs with every breath. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin and saw the purple bruise blooming along her left cheekbone, the split in her lower lip, the way one eye was slightly swollen. She had become expert at hiding these marks over the years, at positioning herself so people saw only her good side, at making excuses when the damage was too obvious to conceal. Today she would have to go to the general store for supplies, and she dreaded facing the townspeople who had witnessed her laughter and Cornelius's humiliation. She waited until mid-morning, when Cornelius left for his job at the land office where he worked as a clerk, a position he considered beneath his talents, but which paid their rent and kept them fed. Once he was gone, Sarah wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, despite the warm September weather, and walked slowly toward town, moving carefully to avoid jostling her injured ribs. The streets of Salt Lake City were busy with the usual morning traffic, wagons rolling past, horses tied at hitching posts, and men conducting business in the shops and saloons that lined the main thoroughfare. She kept her head down as she walked, but she could feel eyes on her, could sense the whispers that followed in her wake. Everyone had seen what happened yesterday. Everyone knew. The shame of it burned almost worse than the physical pain, but she forced herself to keep moving. She needed flour and coffee and thread for mending, and these necessities would not purchase themselves no matter how much she wished to hide in her house forever. Lucas Thatcher was coming out of the feed store when he spotted Sarah Grace making her way down the boardwalk. Even with her shawl and downcast eyes, he recognized her immediately, and when she lifted her head briefly to check for traffic before crossing the street, he got a clear look at her face. The bruise on her cheekbone was dark and ugly, the split lip unmistakable, and rage flooded through him so suddenly and completely that he had to stop walking and take a deep breath to control himself. He had suspected that her husband beat her, but seeing the evidence written so clearly on her delicate features made it real in a way that speculation had not. Lucas stood very still, watching as she entered the general store, and he found himself following almost without conscious decision. He had no plan, no idea what he could possibly say to her, but he could not just walk away and pretend he had not seen. Sarah was examining the thread selection when she became aware of someone standing nearby. She glanced up and found herself looking into the gray eyes of a tall cowboy she had noticed around town in recent weeks. He had a kind face, she thought, weathered but somehow gentle, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not quite identify. Concern, maybe, or pity, and she immediately looked away because she could not bear pity from strangers. "Madam," Lucas said quietly, removing his hat in a gesture of respect, "I do not mean to intrude, but I saw what happened yesterday. Your husband falling into the trough, I mean, and I saw him take you home after." Sarah's hand went reflexively to her bruised cheek, and she pulled the shawl tighter around herself. "I do not know what you mean," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am fine, just clumsy. I walked into a door this morning." "No, you did not," Lucas said, his voice still gentle but firm. "And you do not have to lie to me. I know what I am seeing, and it is not right. A man who would do that to his wife is no kind of man at all." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She could not break down here, not in the middle of the general store where anyone might see. "Please," she whispered, "please just leave me alone. You do not understand. If anyone sees you talking to me, if anyone tells him that I spoke to another man, he will think I am being unfaithful, and it will be worse. It will be so much worse." The fear in her voice cut through Lucas like a knife. He took a step back, giving her space, but he could not bring himself to just walk away completely. "My name is Lucas Thatcher," he said quietly. "I am working at the Brenton Ranch just outside town. If you ever need help, if you ever need somewhere to go, you can find me there. Or you can leave word at the livery stable and I will come. I want you to know that you have options, that you do not have to live like this." Sarah risked a glance at his face and saw only sincerity there. No ulterior motive, no expectation of anything in return. It had been so long since anyone had shown her simple human kindness that she almost did not recognize it. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Lucas replied simply. "And because laughter is medicine for the soul. A woman should be able to laugh when she sees something funny, without being beaten for it. That is just basic human decency." The phrase struck something deep in Sarah's chest, some long-buried part of herself that still remembered what it felt like to laugh freely, to experience joy without fear. For just a moment, she let herself imagine a life where she could be herself, without constantly calculating every word and action to avoid setting off her husband's temper. Then reality crashed back in, and she shook her head. "Thank you for your kindness," she said formally. "But I am married. I made vows before God, and I cannot break them, no matter how difficult things become. This is my life, and I must make the best of it." Lucas wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that no God would expect her to endure abuse in the name of marriage vows, but he could see that pushing her would only make things worse. "The offer stands," he said quietly. "Anytime, day or night. You remember that." He replaced his hat and walked out of the store, leaving Sarah standing alone among the spools of thread, with her heart hammering in her chest, and tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly and forced herself to finish her shopping, but Lucas Thatcher's gray eyes and his simple declaration that she deserved better stayed with her for the rest of the day. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself thinking about the cowboy more than she should. She did not seek him out, and they did not speak again, but sometimes she would see him in town, and he would nod respectfully in her direction. And that small acknowledgement made her feel like maybe she was still a real person, and not just the ghost she had become. Cornelius's moods continued to swing wildly between cold indifference and explosive rage, and Sarah accumulated new bruises to replace the ones that faded. She learned to move through her days like a shadow, trying to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, trying to be invisible enough that he would not notice her except when he wanted something. Lucas found himself watching for Sarah Grace whenever he was in town, and what he saw made him increasingly angry. She was fading away, growing thinner and more withdrawn, moving like someone in the constant pain. He asked discreet questions around town and learned that Cornelius Whitmore had come west after some kind of financial scandal back east, that he had married Sarah when she was 19 and alone after her parents died of fever. She had been vulnerable, and he had taken advantage of that vulnerability, and now she was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. It was late October when everything changed. Lucas had come into town to pick up supplies and was leading his horse past the Whitmore house when he heard sounds that made his blood run cold. A woman's cry of pain, quickly cut off, then the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then a man's voice, Cornelius's voice, saying something too muffled to make out clearly, but dripping with menace. Lucas stood in the street, his hands clenching into fists. Every instinct screamed at him to kick down that door and put a stop to whatever was happening inside, but he knew that legally he had no right. A man's home was his castle, and what happened between husband and wife was considered private business. If he interfered, he could be arrested, and Cornelius would only take his anger at the interference out on Sarah later. But then he heard Sarah scream, a sound of pure terror and pain, and Lucas could not make himself walk away. He strode up to the door and pounded on it with his fist. "Whitmore," he shouted, "I need to speak with you. It is urgent." There was a long silence, then the sound of heavy footsteps. The door opened a crack, and Cornelius Whitmore's florid face appeared, his eyes bloodshot and his breath reeking of whiskey. "What do you want, cowboy?" he demanded. "I am busy." "There is a problem with your account at the feed store," Lucas said, making up the lie on the spot. "The owner sent me to find you, says there is a discrepancy that needs to be addressed immediately, or he will have to report it to the territorial marshal." Cornelius's expression shifted from anger to alarm. "A discrepancy? What kind of discrepancy? I paid my bill last month." "I do not know the details," Lucas said. "He just asked me to fetch you since I was heading this direction. Says it is important enough that it cannot wait until tomorrow." Cornelius muttered a curse and looked back over his shoulder into the house. Lucas could not see past him, but he could guess what he would find if he could look inside. "Fine," Cornelius snapped. "Tell him I will be there in 5 minutes. Let me get my coat." He slammed the door, and Lucas heard him moving around inside, heard his voice raised in what sounded like threats, though the words were unclear. Lucas waited, his jaw tight, until Cornelius emerged, adjusting his coat and hat. He brushed past Lucas without another word and headed toward town at a brisk walk, leaving Lucas standing in the yard. Lucas waited until Cornelius turned the corner out of sight. Then he knocked on the door again, much more gently this time. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called. "It is Lucas Thatcher. I am the one who spoke to you in the general store. Are you all right?" There was no answer for a long moment. Then he heard slow, shuffling footsteps. The door opened just a few inches, and Sarah peered out with one eye, the other one swollen completely shut. Blood trickled from her nose, and her lip was split open again, worse than before. She was holding her left arm against her chest at an odd angle, and Lucas could see bruises forming on her throat in the shape of fingerprints. "You need to leave," she whispered through damaged lips. "If he comes back and finds you here, he will kill me. Please, just go." "Not without you," Lucas said firmly. "Sarah, look at me. Look at what he has done to you. This is not marriage. This is attempted murder. Next time he might actually succeed. You need to come with me right now." "I cannot," Sarah said, tears streaming down her battered face. "I have nowhere to go. I have no money, no family, and the law will not protect me from my own husband. If I leave him, he will hunt me down, and when he finds me, it will be worse than anything he has done before." "Let me worry about that," Lucas said. "Right now, you need medical attention and you need to be somewhere safe. Please, Sarah, trust me." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something there that she had not seen in a very long time. Genuine concern for her well-being, with no expectation of anything in return. Her arm was broken, she was almost certain of that, and every breath sent stabbing pains through her chest that suggested cracked or broken ribs. If she stayed here, if Cornelius came back still drunk and angry, she might not survive the night. "All right," she whispered, "but we have to go now, before he realizes there is no problem at the feed store and comes back." Lucas helped her gather a few essential items into a small bag, moving quickly and efficiently. He took her good arm and guided her out of the house, then lifted her as carefully as he could onto his horse. She bit back a cry of pain as the movement jostled her injuries, but she held on as Lucas swung up behind her and turned the horse toward the edge of town. They rode quickly, leaving Salt Lake City behind them and heading into the open country beyond. Lucas had thought this through during the weeks he had been watching Sarah suffer. He knew a place about 15 miles north, a small settlement called Farmington, where a woman named Clara Brennan ran a boarding house and was known for asking no questions about the women who sometimes appeared at her door fleeing bad situations. Clara was a widow herself and had survived an abusive husband before he drank himself to death, and she had dedicated her life to helping other women escape similar fates. Sarah clung to Lucas as they rode, gritting her teeth against the pain that each of the horse's strides sent jolting through her body. She was terrified of what she had just done, terrified of Cornelius's reaction when he came home and found her gone. But beneath the terror was a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. This cowboy who barely knew her was risking legal trouble and possibly violence to help her, expecting nothing in return, and that kind of selfless kindness was so foreign to her experience that she did not know how to process it. They reached Farmington as the sun was setting, and Lucas guided his horse to a large 2-story house on the edge of the settlement. He dismounted and helped Sarah down carefully, then knocked on the door. A tall, broad-shouldered woman with iron-gray hair opened it, took one look at Sarah's battered face, and stepped aside without a word. "Clara Brennan, this is Sarah Grace," Lucas said. "She needs a place to stay and someone to tend her injuries. Her husband did this to her." Clara's expression hardened, but her voice was gentle as she spoke to Sarah. "Come in, dear. You are safe here. I have tended enough injuries in my time to know what needs doing. Lucas, help me get her upstairs to a room where she can lie down." Between the two of them, they got Sarah upstairs and settled on a bed in a small but clean room. Clara examined her injuries with practiced hands, and her face grew grimmer. "This arm is definitely broken," she said, "and I suspect several cracked ribs. That eye is going to be swollen shut for a few days. Child, he damn near killed you." "I know," Sarah whispered, "but I laughed at him when he fell into a water trough, and he said I embarrassed him in front of the whole town. He had been drinking, and I should have known better than to laugh." "You stop that right now," Clara said firmly. "Nothing you did gave him the right to do this. Nothing. A real man does not beat a woman half to death because she laughed at something funny. That is what cowards do when they want to feel powerful." She looked at Lucas. "Her husband will come looking for her. They always do." "I know," Lucas said grimly, "but she needed help, and I could not just leave her there to die. We will figure out what to do about Whitmore, but first she needs to heal." Clara nodded and turned her attention back to Sarah. "I am going to set this arm and wrap your ribs. It is going to hurt, but you will feel better once it is done. Lucas, you should probably head back before anyone notices you have been gone too long. If questions are asked, you were out checking the fence lines and lost track of time." Lucas hesitated, looking at Sarah's battered face. "Will you be all right?" he asked her. "I will come back to check on you in a few days, but I need to know you will be safe here." "I will watch over her," Clara promised. "No man sets foot in this house without my permission, and I have a shotgun for anyone foolish enough to try. She will be safe." Sarah reached out with her good hand and touched Lucas's arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life today. I will never forget that." Lucas covered her hand briefly with his own. feeling something shift in his chest at the touch. "Laughter is medicine for the soul," he said softly, repeating the words he had spoken to her in the general store. "Someday, I hope you get to laugh freely again, without fear. You deserve that." He left before he could say anything more, riding back towards Salt Lake City through the gathering darkness. Behind him, Clara Brennan set to work tending Sarah's injuries, speaking in a low, comforting voice as she worked. Sarah endured the pain of having her arms set and her ribs wrapped, and when it was finally done, she lay back against the pillows and let herself cry properly for the first time in 3 years. She cried for the girl she had been before she married Cornelius, for the innocence and hope she had lost, for all the days and nights she had spent in fear. But she also cried with relief, because for the first time in so long, she was somewhere he could not reach her, somewhere she could breathe without constantly calculating his mood and adjusting her behavior accordingly. Clara sat with her until she cried herself out, then helped her drink some willow bark tea for the pain and tucked her into bed like a child. "Sleep now," Clara said gently. "Tomorrow will come soon enough, and with it all the decisions you will need to make. But tonight you rest and let your body begin to heal." Sarah closed her good eye and drifted into a sleep deeper and more peaceful than any she had known in her entire marriage. Back in Salt Lake City, Cornelius Whitmore stormed into the feed store, only to find the owner locking up for the evening. When questioned about the supposed problem with Cornelius's account, the owner looked confused and insisted there was no problem, that the account was paid in full. Cornelius felt cold understanding settle over him. Someone had lied to get him away from his house, and there was only one reason why anyone would do that. He ran back through the darkening streets and burst into his empty home, already knowing what he would find. Sarah was gone. Her clothes were gone. She had actually dared to leave him, to defy him and run away like she had any right to make decisions for herself. The rage that consumed Cornelius then was unlike anything he had felt before. He tore through the house, looking for clues to where she might have gone, but there was nothing. Then he remembered the cowboy who had come to the door, the tall man with the steady eyes who had delivered the false message, and he knew exactly who had helped his wife escape. Cornelius spent that night drinking and plotting revenge. His wife belonged to him, was legally his property, and no cowboy had the right to interfere in his marriage. He would find Sarah and bring her back, and when he did, he would make sure she never even thought about leaving again. And as for the cowboy, well, there were ways of dealing with men who did not mind their own business. The next morning, Cornelius went to the territorial marshal and filed a report claiming that his wife had been abducted by a ranch hand named Lucas Thatcher. He painted himself as a concerned husband whose innocent wife had been taken against her will, and he demanded that the marshal bring her back immediately. The marshal, a weathered man named Tom Hendricks, who had seen just about everything in his 20 years of law enforcement, listened to Cornelius's story with a skeptical expression. "Your wife was abducted, you say," Hendricks repeated slowly. "Against her will." "Absolutely," Cornelius insisted. "This cowboy has been watching her for weeks, following her around town. I noticed it, but I thought he was harmless. Clearly I was wrong. He must have broken into my house while I was out on an errand and taken her by force." "And you did not hear anything? No struggle, no cry for help?" Cornelius hesitated just a fraction too long. "I was not home," he said. "I had been called away on urgent business at the feed store. When I returned, she was simply gone." Marshal Hendricks leaned back in his chair and studied Cornelius with eyes that had learned to read men over decades of dealing with criminals and liars. He had heard talk around town about Cornelius Whitmore and his wife, had seen Sarah's bruises and heard her unconvincing explanations about being clumsy. He did not like Whitmore, and he suspected the man was lying now. But the law was the law, and a husband had rights over his wife that superseded almost everything else. "I will look into it," Hendricks said finally. "If this Thatcher fellow did take your wife against her will, there will be consequences. But I will need to speak to your wife directly and hear her side of things before I make any arrests." "Of course," Cornelius said smoothly. "I am sure once you find her, she will tell you exactly what happened. The poor woman must be terrified." After Cornelius left, Marshal Hendricks sat at his desk and thought for a long while. Then he saddled his horse and rode out to the Brenton Ranch to have a conversation with Lucas Thatcher. He found Lucas working in the corral, training a young horse, and watched him work for a few minutes before calling out, "Lucas Thatcher, need a word with you." Lucas looked up, saw the marshal's badge, and felt his stomach tighten. He had known this was coming, but that did not make it any easier. He handed the horse's lead rope to another ranch hand and walked over to where Hendricks sat on his horse. "Marshal," Lucas said evenly, "what can I do for you?" "Cornelius Whitmore says you abducted his wife," Hendricks said bluntly. "Says you broke into his house and took her against her will. What do you say to that?" "I say that is a lie," Lucas replied without hesitation. "I helped Sarah leave because her husband was beating her to death. When I found her yesterday, she had a broken arm, cracked ribs, a face full of bruises, and bruises on her throat where he had choked her. She was terrified he was going to kill her, and I believed her. So yes, I helped her get somewhere safe, but she came willingly. More than willingly. She was desperate to get away from him." Hendricks nodded slowly. "That is what I figured. I have seen Sarah Whitmore around town with those bruises she tries to hide. But the law is clear on this, Thatcher. A wife belongs to her husband, and interfering in a marriage is a serious offense. Whitmore has the right to demand she come back, and if I find her, I will have to tell him where she is." "Even if returning to him means she dies?" Lucas asked, his voice hard. "Even if the next time he loses his temper he beats her to death? That is the law you are sworn to uphold?" "I do not like it any more than you do," Hendricks admitted. "But yes, that is the law. My advice to you is to stay out of this. If you keep interfering, Whitmore can have you arrested, and he can make your life very difficult. Some fights cannot be won, son, no matter how right you are." "I cannot just abandon her," Lucas said quietly. "She has nobody else. If I walk away now, I am as bad as all the other people who have stood by and watched him abuse her." Hendricks sighed and rubbed his face tiredly. "Where is she now? And before you answer, think carefully. If you tell me, I will have to tell Whitmore. But if you do not tell me, I can honestly say I do not know." Lucas looked the marshal in the eyes and saw a man who was trying to work within an unjust system while still maintaining some shred of decency. "I do not know where she is," Lucas said, which was technically true since he had left Sarah at Clara's boarding house, and she might have moved since then. "I helped her get somewhere safe, but I do not know her current location." "Fair enough," Hendricks said. He started to turn his horse away, then paused. "For what it is worth, Thatcher, I think you did the right thing. But the right thing is not always the legal thing, and that is going to cause you trouble. Watch your back around Whitmore. Men like him do not take kindly to being made to look foolish, and he blames you for his wife leaving." Lucas watched the marshal ride away, then went back to work, but his mind was miles away in Farmington with a battered woman who had shown more courage in leaving her abuser than most people showed in a lifetime. 3 days passed before Lucas could get away to ride to Farmington and check on Sarah. When he arrived at Clara's boarding house, he found Sarah sitting in a rocking chair on the porch, her left arm in a sling, and her face still showing the yellow and purple remains of bruises. But her good eye was open now, and when she saw him riding up the lane, something like joy crossed her features. "Lucas," she said as he dismounted and walked up the porch steps, "I was hoping you would come back." "How could I not?" he replied, taking off his hat and sitting in the chair next to hers. "How are you feeling? You look better than you did 3 days ago, though that is not saying much considering how bad you looked then." Sarah managed a small smile that pulled at her healing lip. "Clara has been taking wonderful care of me. The pain is less than it was, though my ribs still ache when I breathe deeply. She says my arm should heal straight if I am careful with it." Her smile faded. "Lucas, has Cornelius come looking for me? Has there been trouble?" "He went to the marshal and claimed I abducted you," Lucas said. "The marshal came out to question me, but I told him the truth about why you left, and he seemed to accept it. I also told him I do not know where you are, which is technically true since I left you here, but have no way of knowing if you are still here or have moved on." "I have nowhere to move on to," Sarah said softly. "Clara has been kind, but I cannot stay here forever. I have no money to pay for my room and board, and I cannot work until my arm heals. Even then, what kind of work can I do? I have no skills beyond keeping house, and no one will hire me to do that if they know I am a runaway wife." Lucas had been thinking about this problem for 3 days, and he had come up with an idea, though he was not sure how Sarah would react to it. "I have a proposal," he said carefully, "and I want you to understand that I am not expecting anything from you, that this is simply a practical solution to a difficult problem." Sarah looked at him with curiosity and a touch of wariness. "What kind of proposal?" "Marry me," Lucas said bluntly. "Not because I'm trying to take advantage of you, But because as my wife you would be protected from Cornelius. He could not force you to come back because you would belong to someone else, legally speaking. I know that is not a romantic reason to marry, but it would solve your immediate problems." Sarah stared at him, her mouth open in shock. "You cannot be serious. You barely know me. Why would you tie yourself to a woman who is already married, who comes with nothing but trouble and broken bones?" "Because I think you deserve better than what you have had," Lucas said simply. "And because I have been watching you for weeks now, and I see someone who is brave and strong and kind, someone who has survived things that would have broken a weaker person. I would be proud to call you my wife, Sarah Grace, even if it starts as just a practical arrangement." "But I am already married," Sarah protested. "I cannot marry you while I am still married to Cornelius. That would be bigamy." "There are ways around that," Lucas said. "We could go to a different territory, start over where nobody knows us. Or we could wait until you can file for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. It would not be easy, but it could be done. The point is, you would have options you do not have now." Sarah felt tears welling up in her good eye. Nobody had ever offered her anything like this before, had ever wanted to protect her without expecting something in return. "I do not understand why you would do this for me," she whispered. "What do you get out of it?" "The knowledge that I helped someone who needed help," Lucas replied. "And maybe, in time, the chance to know you better and see if this arrangement might grow into something more. But there is no pressure, Sarah. If you want my help but not marriage, I will still do everything I can to keep you safe from Cornelius. I am not trying to trap you into anything." Sarah looked at this cowboy who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she had not dared to pray. He was handsome in a rugged way, with kind eyes and gentle hands, and he was offering her not just safety, but respect and choice, two things she had not had in 3 years of marriage. The idea of marrying again terrified her, but the idea of spending the rest of her life running from Cornelius terrified her more. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is all happening so fast, and I cannot make a decision like this while my head is still spinning from everything that has happened." "Take all the time you need," Lucas assured her. "I am not going anywhere. I will come back in a few days to check on you again, and if you have made a decision by then, we can talk about next steps. If not, that is fine too." He stood to leave, but Sarah reached out with her good hand and caught his sleeve. "Lucas, wait, I need to know something. If I said yes to this marriage, would you expect me to share your bed? Would you expect wifely duties from me?" Lucas sat back down and looked her in the eyes. "No," he said firmly. "Not unless and until you decided you wanted that. If we marry, it would be a legal arrangement for your protection. We could present ourselves as husband and wife to the world, but in private you would have your own space and your own choices about everything. I will not lie and say I do not find you attractive, because I do, but I would never force myself on you or expect anything you are not willing to give freely. You have had enough of being treated like property. I would treat you like a partner." Sarah felt something tight in her chest loosen just a fraction. "You are unlike any man I have ever met," she said softly. "I will think seriously about your proposal, Lucas, and thank you for everything. You have shown me more kindness in a week than I have known in years." Lucas rode back to Salt Lake City with his heart lighter than it had been in weeks, though he knew difficult times were ahead. Cornelius Whitmore was not the type to give up easily, and the law was on his side. But Lucas had meant every word he said to Sarah. She deserved better, and if he could give her a chance at a better life, then whatever trouble came his way would be worth it. Over the next 2 weeks, Lucas visited Sarah several times, bringing her small gifts like a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, and a warm shawl Clara mentioned she needed. They talked for hours on those visits, sharing stories of their lives before they met, learning about each other in a way that felt natural and unhurried. Sarah told him about her childhood as the daughter of a shopkeeper, about her dreams of becoming a teacher before her parents died and left her alone. Lucas told her about growing up on a small ranch, about his father's death in the mines, and his mother's struggle to keep the family together. With each visit, Sarah felt herself relaxing in Lucas's presence. He never pushed her for an answer about marriage, never made her feel pressured or obligated. He was simply there, steady and reliable, offering friendship and support. She found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that surprised her, and she began to realize that what she felt for him was not just gratitude but genuine affection. It was during his 4th visit, 3 weeks after he had helped her escape, that Sarah made her decision. They were sitting on the porch in the cool November afternoon, and Lucas had just finished telling her a funny story about a misadventure during a cattle drive that had her laughing so hard her ribs ached. "Oh," she gasped, holding her side. "Please, no more. It hurts to laugh." "But you are laughing," Lucas pointed out with a smile. "That is the first time I have heard you really laugh, and it is a beautiful sound." Sarah's laughter faded, but the smile remained on her face. "You were right, what you said that day in the general store. Laughter is medicine for the soul. I had forgotten what it felt like to laugh without fear, to just enjoy something funny without worrying about the consequences." She took a deep breath. "Lucas, I have made a decision about your proposal. If you still want to marry me, if you truly meant what you said about partnership and respect, then yes, I will marry you." Lucas felt his heart skip in his chest. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel pressured into this." "I am sure," Sarah said firmly. "You have shown me in 1,000 small ways that you are a good man, that you mean what you say. I cannot go back to Cornelius, and I cannot spend the rest of my life hiding. But with you, I think I might be able to build a new life, maybe even a happy one. I am not saying I love you yet, because I need time to learn what love really means when it does not come with fists and fear. But I like you, Lucas Thatcher, and I trust you. That is enough to start with." "That is more than enough," Lucas agreed, reaching out to take her good hand in his. "We will take this one day at a time, Sarah. No pressure, no expectations beyond basic partnership and respect. And I promise you, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you are placing in me." They began making plans immediately. Lucas knew that getting married in Utah territory while Sarah was still legally married to Cornelius would be complicated and potentially dangerous. After talking it over with Clara, they decided the best course of action would be to head to Colorado territory, where records were less carefully kept, and where Sarah could claim to be a widow if anyone asked questions. It was not entirely legal, but it was the best option available to them. Before they could leave, however, Cornelius Whitmore finally tracked down Sarah's location. One of Clara's neighbors had seen Lucas visiting and mentioned it to someone in Salt Lake City, and word had eventually gotten back to Cornelius. He arrived at Clara's boarding house on a cold November morning with the territorial marshal and 3 other men, demanding that Sarah be returned to him immediately. Clara met them at the door with her shotgun in hand. "You are not welcome here, Whitmore," she said firmly. "And neither are your friends. This is private property, and I am telling you to leave." "That is my wife inside," Cornelius snarled. "She was taken from me illegally, and I have every right to take her back. Marshal, arrest this woman for harboring a fugitive." Marshal Hendricks looked uncomfortable, but he stepped forward. "Mrs. Brennan, I am sorry, but the law is clear. Mrs. Whitmore is legally married to this man, and he has the right to take her home. If you refuse to hand her over, I will have to charge you with obstruction." "Then charge me," Clara said flatly. "I will not hand over a woman to a man who beats her half to death. You can arrest me if you want, but I will not make it easy." Sarah heard the commotion from upstairs where she had been resting. Her blood ran cold when she recognized Cornelius's voice, and she knew she had to face this moment. She could not let Clara be arrested for protecting her. Moving carefully because her ribs still pained her, she made her way downstairs and stepped out onto the porch. "I am here, Cornelius," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You do not need to threaten Clara. This is between us." Cornelius's face twisted with rage and triumph when he saw her. "Sarah, you stupid woman, did you really think you could run away from me? Did you think some cowboy could save you from your lawful husband?" "He already did save me," Sarah said quietly. "He saved me from dying at your hands, which is what would have happened if I had stayed." "You belong to me," Cornelius said, starting up the porch steps. "The law says so, and you are coming home right now." "No," Sarah said, standing her ground even though every instinct screamed at her to run. "I am not going anywhere with you. I would rather be arrested for abandoning my marriage than go back to being beaten every time you have too much whiskey." Cornelius lunged at her, but before he could reach her, Lucas Thatcher appeared from around the side of the house. He had been working in Clara's barn when the group arrived, and he had heard everything. Now he stepped between Sarah and Cornelius, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "She said no, Whitmore," Lucas said quietly. "You heard her. She is not going with you." "You," Cornelius spat. "This is all your fault, you interfering bastard. You turned my wife against me, poisoned her mind with lies." I did not turn her against you, Lucas replied. You did that yourself every time you raised your fist to her, every time you made her bleed, every time you made her cry. You destroyed your own marriage, Whitmore, and now you have to live with the consequences. Cornelius looked at the marshal. Arrest him. He has admitted to helping my wife leave me. That is abduction, and I want him arrested right now. Marshal Hendricks sighed heavily. Thatcher, did you help Mrs. Whitmore leave her husband? Yes, I did, Lucas said without hesitation. Because he had beaten her so badly, I thought she might die. I have seen men treat animals better than he treated his wife, and I could not stand by and do nothing. That is still interference in a legal marriage. Hendricks said, I am going to have to take you in, and I am going to have to insist that Mrs. Whitmore return with her husband. Like hell, Clara said, raising her shotgun. Nobody is taking anybody anywhere. The only law being broken here is the law that says a man can beat his wife to death and call it his right. I do not recognize that law, and I will not help enforce it. The standoff might have turned ugly if not for the appearance of another rider coming up the lane to the boarding house. He was an older man with silver hair and a badge that identified him as a federal marshal, a higher authority than the territorial marshal. He dismounted and walked up to the group with an air of calm authority. I heard there was a disturbance out here, he said. I am Federal Marshal Jameson Cole. Someone want to tell me what is going on? Marshal Hendricks quickly explained the situation, and Cole listened carefully, his sharp eyes taking in Sarah's still healing injuries and Cornelius's belligerent stance. When the territorial marshal finished speaking, Cole turned to Sarah. Mrs. Whitmore, did you leave your husband voluntarily, or were you taken against your will? I left voluntarily, Sarah said clearly. Lucas Thatcher helped me leave because I asked him to. My husband had beaten me so severely that I feared for my life. I had a broken arm, cracked ribs, and extensive bruising. I left because I believed that staying would result in my death. She is lying, Cornelius protested. She fell down the stairs. That is how she was injured. I would never hurt my wife. Really? Cole said skeptically. He walked over to Sarah and gently touched the fading bruise on her cheek. This is consistent with being struck by a fist, and those marks on your throat, madam, those are from being choked. I have seen enough violence in my years as a marshal to recognize the signs of abuse. He turned to Cornelius. Mr. Whitmore, I could arrest you right now for assault. The fact that the victim is your wife does not give you the right to beat her. The law says a man can discipline his wife, Cornelius said, but some of his confidence was fading. The law says a lot of things, Cole replied, but federal law also prohibits extreme cruelty, and what you did to this woman qualifies. Now, here is what is going to happen. Mrs. Whitmore is going to stay here under federal protection while she files for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. You, Mr. Whitmore, are going to return to Salt Lake City, and you are going to stay away from your wife. If I hear that you have attempted to contact her or threatened her in any way, I will arrest you and you will stand trial for assault. Am I making myself clear? Cornelius's face turned purple with rage, but he could see that he had lost. A federal marshal outranked a territorial marshal, and Cole had the authority to make good on his threats. This is not over, he hissed at Sarah. You are still my wife, and you always will be. Not for much longer, Cole said mildly. Now get out of here before I change my mind and arrest you anyway. Cornelius stomped back to his horse, the other men following him. As they rode away, Sarah felt her legs give out, and she would have fallen if Lucas had not caught her. She clung to him, shaking with reaction, and he held her carefully, mindful of her still healing injuries. It is all right, he murmured. He is gone, and he cannot hurt you anymore. You are safe now. How did you know to come here? Clara asked the federal marshal, lowering her shotgun at last. I received a telegram from an old friend in Salt Lake City, who said there was a situation developing that required federal attention, Cole replied. Seems word had gotten around about Mr. Whitmore's treatment of his wife, and some folks were concerned about what might happen if he tracked her down. I am glad I got here when I did. Over the next few months, Sarah filed for divorce with Cole's help and testimony. It was a lengthy process, complicated by Cornelius's attempts to fight it, and by the legal system's general reluctance to grant divorces. But Cole was persistent, and he had connections, and eventually a judge ruled in Sarah's favor, granting her a divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty and awarding her a small settlement from the sale of the house she and Cornelius had shared. During those months, Sarah continued to heal both physically and emotionally. Her arm mended straight thanks to Clara's careful attention, and her ribs stopped aching every time she breathed. The bruises faded until they were gone completely, leaving only memories. More importantly, the constant fear that had been her companion for 3 years began to fade as well. She learned to sleep without nightmares, to move through her days without constantly calculating how to avoid setting off someone's temper. Lucas visited as often as his work allowed, and with each visit Sarah felt herself falling more deeply in love with him. He was everything Cornelius was not: kind, patient, respectful, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings. He made her laugh with his stories and listened intently when she needed to talk about her experiences. He brought her wildflowers and books, helped Clara with repairs around the boarding house, and never once pressured Sarah for more than she was willing to give. It was early spring of 1879 when Sarah's divorce was finally granted, and Lucas was waiting on Clara's porch when she returned from the courthouse with the papers that declared her a free woman. She ran to him and threw her arms around his neck, and he spun her around in a circle, both of them laughing with joy and relief. "It is over," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I am free, Lucas, truly free." "Then let me ask you properly this time," Lucas said, setting her down gently and taking both her hands in his. "Sarah Grace, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need protection or because it is a practical arrangement, but because I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Lucas Thatcher, and I want nothing more than to be your wife." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at a small church in Farmington, with Clara standing as witness and Marshall Cole giving Sarah away in place of the father she had lost years before. Sarah wore a simple dress of pale blue that Clara had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of spring wildflowers that Lucas had picked that morning. When Lucas slipped the simple gold ring onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her for all his days, Sarah felt a joy so pure and complete that she thought her heart might burst with it. Their wedding night was gentle and unhurried, with Lucas taking his time to show Sarah that physical intimacy could be something beautiful when it was based on love and mutual respect rather than ownership and dominance. He was patient with her nervousness, stopping whenever she needed him to stop, proceeding only when she encouraged him to continue. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, Sarah cried tears of happiness because she had never imagined that being with a man could feel like this, safe and cherished and wholly right. Lucas found work at a ranch near Farmington, and they rented a small house on the property where they began building their life together. It was not an easy life because ranch work was hard and the pay was modest, but it was a good life filled with laughter and love and small moments of joy. Sarah discovered that she loved keeping house when it was for someone who appreciated her efforts. And Lucas discovered that coming home to Sarah's smile at the end of a long day made even the hardest work worthwhile. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing their dreams and fears, learning each other's secrets and stories. Sarah told Lucas about the girl she had been before Cornelius, and Lucas helped her rediscover that part of herself. She started laughing more freely, singing while she worked, even teaching herself to play an old guitar that Lucas bought for her at a traveling merchant's sale. Lucas, in turn, found himself opening up about his own losses and regrets, about the mother he had not been able to save and the sister who had died young. Sarah held him while he grieved and reminded him that he had done the best he could with what he had. In the summer of 1880, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous about telling Lucas because she was not sure how she would handle motherhood after all the trauma she had endured. But Lucas was overjoyed. He fussed over her constantly, making sure she did not overwork herself, bringing her things to tempt her appetite when morning sickness made food unappealing. And when their son was born in early spring of 1881, a healthy baby with Lucas's dark hair and Sarah's delicate features, Lucas cried tears of joy as he held his son for the first time. They named him William, after Lucas's father, and called him Will. He was a happy baby with a ready smile and an easy temperament, and Sarah discovered that motherhood was not the fearful thing she had imagined, but rather a source of deep fulfillment and joy. Lucas was a devoted father who helped with all the tasks of childcare without complaint, and watching him gentle their son with those large, work-roughened hands made Sarah fall even more deeply in love with her husband. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter named Emma, who had her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. Emma was more spirited than her brother, full of mischief and laughter, and she kept her parents on their toes from the moment she could crawl. Sarah sometimes looked at her daughter's fearless joy and thought about the woman she might have become if she had never married Cornelius, if she had been allowed to grow up free and unafraid. But then she would look at Lucas and their children and realize that if her past had been different, her present would be different too, and she would not trade her current happiness for anything. They heard occasionally about Cornelius Whitmore through the grapevine of gossip that connected settlements across the territory. He had left Salt Lake City shortly after the divorce, his reputation in tatters, and had moved to California, where he eventually drank himself to death in a San Francisco boarding house. When Sarah heard the news, she felt nothing but relief that he was gone from the world and could hurt no one else the way he had hurt her. As the years passed, Lucas and Sarah's love deepened and matured into something unshakable. They had their disagreements, as all couples do, but they had learned to talk through their problems rather than let anger fester. Lucas never raised his voice or his hand to Sarah, and Sarah never feared him even in their worst moments. They built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection, and they taught their children by example what a healthy marriage looked like. In 1885, Lucas had saved enough money to buy a small ranch of their own, 50 acres with a creek running through it and enough good grazing land to support a modest herd of cattle. They built a house together, larger than the one they had been renting, with room for their growing family and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Sarah planted a garden and Lucas built a fence, and together they created a home that was filled with warmth and love and the sound of children's laughter. On their 6th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Sarah with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of pens. "I know you always wanted to be a teacher," he said, "and I thought maybe you could start by writing down your story, not just the hard parts, but all of it, how you survived, how you found your way to happiness. Maybe someday our grandchildren will read it and understand that no matter how dark things seem, there is always hope for something better." Sarah held the journal against her chest and kissed her husband with all the love she felt for him. "You are the best man I have ever known," she said softly. "You taught me that laughter really is medicine for the soul, that kindness is not weakness, and that love does not have to hurt. You saved my life in every way that matters, Lucas Thatcher." "You saved mine too," Lucas replied, pulling her close. "Before I met you, I was just drifting through life without purpose. You gave me a reason to be better, to work harder, to build something lasting. You and the children are everything to me, Sarah. Everything." They stood together on their porch as the sun set over their land, their children playing in the yard, and Sarah marveled at how far she had come from that terrified woman who had laughed at her husband falling into a water trough. That moment had been the beginning of her new life, the catalyst that had brought Lucas into her world and given her the courage to leave behind everything she had known in search of something better. In 1888, Sarah gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Jack, and their family felt complete. Lucas continued working their ranch with help from hired hands when needed, and Sarah divided her time between raising their children and teaching reading and writing to the children of neighboring ranchers who had no access to regular schooling. She discovered that she had a gift for teaching, that she could inspire children to love learning, and it gave her a sense of purpose beyond her family. One evening in the autumn of 1890, when Sarah was 34 years old and Lucas was 40, they sat together on their porch after the children had gone to bed. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, and Sarah was wrapped in a warm shawl while Lucas held her hand. They sat in comfortable silence for a long while, just enjoying each other's presence until Sarah spoke. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking a chance on a broken woman with nothing to offer but trouble and fear?" Lucas turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "Never. Not for one single moment. You were never broken, Sarah. You were bent by circumstances beyond your control, but you were never broken, and you have given me everything that matters. Love, children, a home, a purpose. I am the luckiest man alive to have you as my wife." "I used to think happiness was not meant for me," Sarah admitted. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life just surviving, just enduring. But you showed me that there was more to life than that. You taught me to laugh again, to trust again, to love again. You kept your promise, Lucas. You made me happy every single day. And I will keep making that promise every day for the rest of our lives, Lucas vowed, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. Whatever comes, we will face it together. We are partners, remember, in everything. Their children grew up strong and healthy, raised with love and discipline in equal measure. Will, their eldest, inherited his father's quiet competence and love of the land. He learned ranching from Lucas and eventually took over more and more of the daily operations as Lucas grew older. Emma grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's kindness and her father's determination, and she became a teacher herself, inspired by watching her mother teach the neighborhood children. Jack, the youngest, had a gift with horses that amazed everyone who saw him work, and he helped train the horses they raised on the ranch to sell to neighboring farms and ranches. In 1895, when Sarah was 39 and Lucas was 45, they celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together all their friends and neighbors. Clara Brennan made the trip from Farmington, now elderly but still sharp-witted and independent. Federal Marshal Cole, retired but still spry, came as well, bringing his new wife, who he had married late in life. They all gathered in Lucas and Sarah's home, sharing food and stories and laughter. And Sarah looked around at the people who filled her house and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. During the party, Clara pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "I am proud of you, girl," the older woman said, her eyes misty. "When Lucas brought you to my door all those years ago, I was not sure you would survive. You were so broken down, so afraid. But look at you now. Look at this life you have built, this family you have raised. You did more than survive, Sarah. You thrived." "I could not have done it without you," Sarah said, embracing Clara carefully because the older woman's bones were fragile now. "You gave me a safe place to heal, and you showed me that there were still good people in the world. I will never forget that." "And you showed me that my work mattered," Clara replied. "Every woman I helped over the years, I wondered if I was really making a difference. But seeing you now, seeing how happy you are, I know it was all worthwhile." As the party wound down and their guests began to leave, Lucas found Sarah standing at the window, watching their children play with the children of their neighbors in the yard. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about that day in Salt Lake City when I laughed at you falling in the water trough," Sarah said with a small smile. "Wait, no, that was Cornelius who fell. I am thinking about the day you told me that laughter is medicine for the soul. I am thinking about how one moment of courage, one choice to accept help from a stranger, changed everything. If I had not gotten into your horse that day, if I had stayed with Cornelius out of fear or duty or shame, I would be dead now. But instead, I am here, with you and our children, living a life I never dreamed was possible. We were both lucky that day," Lucas said quietly. "I got the chance to help someone who needed it. And in helping you, I found everything I had been looking for without even knowing I was searching. You gave my life meaning, Sarah. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to work hard and be better. I love you more today than I did 16 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Sarah turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his and whispered, "I love you, Lucas Thatcher. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for showing me that fairy tales can come true, even for broken women who have given up hope." "You were never broken," Lucas repeated firmly, "and you never gave up hope, or you would not have had the courage to leave. You saved yourself, Sarah. I just held the door open." They stood together in the window, watching their children play in the golden afternoon light, and Sarah knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not perfection, because life was never perfect, but love, genuine and deep and unwavering, partnership, built on respect and trust, family, created through sacrifice and devotion, and laughter, so much laughter, because Lucas had been right all those years ago. Laughter really was medicine for the soul. Years continued to pass in a gentle rhythm of seasons and celebrations. They watched their children grow into adults and begin families of their own. Will married a sweet-tempered young woman named Catherine and gave them 2 grandsons. Emma married a young teacher named David, and they moved to Salt Lake City where they opened a school together. Jack married his childhood sweetheart Hannah, and they stayed on the ranch to help Lucas with the work that was becoming more difficult as he aged. In 1905, Lucas and Sarah celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Lucas was 53 now, his dark hair silvered at the temples, his face lined by years of sun and wind, but still handsome to Sarah's eyes. Sarah was 49, her blonde hair also streaked with silver, but her eyes still sparkled with the joy she had reclaimed all those years ago. 26 years, Lucas said, raising a glass of cider in a toast. 26 years of marriage to the most amazing woman I have ever known. Sarah, you have made every single day of those 26 years worthwhile. Here is to 26 more, and then 26 more after that. Here is to forever, Sarah said, clinking her glass against his. Because even forever would not be long enough with you. Their grandchildren, too young to understand the depth of emotion in their grandparents' words, cheered and clapped because there was cake to be eaten and games to be played. But their children understood because Will and Emma and Jack had grown up witnessing the love between their parents, had learned what a good marriage looked like through their example. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Lucas and Sarah took a walk around their property under a sky full of stars. They walked slowly, hand in hand, past the barn where Lucas had spent countless hours, past the garden Sarah had tended for over 2 decades, past the creek where their children had learned to swim and fish. "Do you remember our wedding night?" Sarah asked suddenly. "How nervous I was, how patient you were." "I remember everything about our life together," Lucas replied. "Every moment, good and bad, has been precious to me." "I never told you this," Sarah said, "but that night, when you held me and showed me that love did not have to hurt, something inside me healed that I did not even know was broken. You gave me back my body, my right to feel pleasure instead of just pain. That was a gift beyond measure." Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "You gave me the gift of being needed, of being trusted with something precious. Before I met you, I thought I would spend my life alone, drifting from job to job with nothing to anchor me. You became my anchor, Sarah. You and the children, this ranch, this life we built together. You gave me everything." They stood in the starlight, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life filled with light. Sarah thought about the terrified woman she had been, the one who had laughed at her husband falling into a water trough and paid for it with broken bones and blood. She thought about the cowboy who had told her that laughter was medicine for the soul and had proven it by giving her a life where she could laugh freely every single day. "I am so grateful," Sarah whispered, "for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led me here to you. I would not change a single thing if it meant losing what we have together." "Neither would I," Lucas agreed. "Neither would I." They walked back to their house as the moon rose higher in the sky, and when they climbed into bed together that night, they held each other close, still very much in love after 26 years of marriage. Sarah fell asleep with her head on Lucas's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she was the luckiest woman alive. In the years that followed, they continued to age together with grace and dignity. Lucas taught his grandsons the skills he had learned over a lifetime of ranch work, and Sarah taught her granddaughters to read and write and think for themselves. They attended barn dances and church socials, helped their neighbors during hard times, and welcomed new babies and mourned old friends who passed on. In 1912, when Sarah was 56 and Lucas was 62, they decided to take a trip back to Salt Lake City. They had not been back since Sarah fled all those years ago, and she felt ready now to face the ghosts of her past, with Lucas by her side. The town had grown considerably in the intervening years, with paved streets and electric lights, and buildings that had not existed when Sarah lived there. They walked down the main street together, and Sarah showed Lucas the general store, where he had first told her she deserved better, the house where she had lived with Cornelius, the water trough that Cornelius had fallen into all those years ago. "It seems smaller now," Sarah said, looking around at the town that had loomed so large in her nightmares for years. "Less frightening. I spent so much of my life here being afraid, and now it just looks like any other town." "Because you are different now," Lucas said wisely. "You are not that scared woman anymore. You are strong and confident and free. The place has not changed, but you have." They visited the cemetery before they left, and Sarah placed flowers on the graves of her parents whom she had not been able to properly mourn when she was married to Cornelius. She told them about her life, about Lucas and the children and the grandchildren, about the happiness she had found. And when they rode away from Salt Lake City for the last time, Sarah felt a sense of closure, as though she had finally put the last pieces of her painful past to rest. The years rolled on, bringing with them both joy and sorrow, as all lives contain. They lost Clara Brennan in 1914, and Sarah cried at the funeral because she had lost not just a friend, but a woman who had been like a mother to her when she needed one most. Federal Marshal Cole passed away the following year, and Lucas served as a pallbearer because the old marshal had saved Sarah's life, as surely as Lucas had. But there was joy too. More grandchildren were born, and then great-grandchildren. Their ranch continued to prosper under Jack's management, and Will's sons started their own ranches nearby. Emma's school in Salt Lake City became one of the most respected in the territory, and she credited her success to watching her mother teach with patience and love. Their children gave them a legacy that extended far beyond bloodlines, a legacy of kindness, hard work, and the belief that people could change their circumstances through courage and determination. In 1920, Lucas and Sarah celebrated their 41st wedding anniversary. Lucas was 68 now, still strong, but moving more slowly, his joints stiff from years of hard work. Sarah was 64, her hair completely silver now, but her smile still radiant. They sat together on their porch, as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. 41 years, Sarah marveled. When you proposed to me that first time, when I was still broken and afraid, did you ever imagine we would be sitting here 41 years later? I hoped, Lucas admitted. I hoped that you would heal and that we would build something lasting. But I never could have imagined how good it would actually be. The reality exceeded every hope I had, Sarah. You exceeded every hope. We did it together, Sarah said, squeezing his hand. Everything we built as partners. You never tried to control me or diminish me. You made me your equal from the very beginning, even when the law said I belonged to you. That is what made all the difference, Lucas. That is what made this marriage everything a marriage should be. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Sarah thought about all the miles she had traveled from that moment when she laughed at Cornelius falling into a water trough. She had walked through fire and come out the other side stronger, had learned that love could heal even the deepest wounds, had discovered that happiness was not just for other people, but for her too. Thank you, she said softly, not for the first time, and certainly not for the last. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for hearing me when I had no voice, for loving me when I thought I was unlovable. Thank you for teaching me that laughter really is medicine for the soul. Lucas pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, and they sat together as darkness fell around them. Their children would check on them soon, bringing dinner and news and grandchildren to kiss goodnight. But for now, it was just the two of them, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was worth every hardship it had taken to create it. I love you, Sarah Thatcher, Lucas said, using her married name the way he had for over 4 decades. Today, tomorrow, and always. I love you too, Sarah replied, resting her head on his shoulder. More than words can say. And there, on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the land they had tended and the legacy they had created, Lucas and Sarah Thatcher sat in perfect contentment. They had started with nothing but courage and kindness, and they had built an empire of love that would last for generations. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had started that way. Instead, it was a story of daily choices to be kind, to be patient, to honor each other and the vows they had made. It was a story of healing and hope, of laughter reclaimed and joy rediscovered. It was, quite simply, a love story for the ages.